draw on the front. Good. Front of the face is somewhere there. And from there you can start to kind of build out. Now it's actually better to use your eye because this is only accurate within a couple of centimetres. Your eye is accurate within a couple of millimetres. So let's go back of the head. From the back of the head down to the neck. Especially when you're getting started, it's much more kind of beneficial to make straight lines. Even if you see a curved lines are still actually just a series of lots of short straight lines. And so that kind of helps you to get a bit more of the structure. Because also then you can use those points, so you can only go, how does that relate to that, and how does that relate to that and that. So it helps you to kind of match your way across the portrait. Okay, so now forehead, back of neck. And start to get in a couple of the features. Okay. Base of the nose is somewhere there. Okay, and then rather than kind of looking at features and looking at the ear, it's much better to look for the shape of light and the shape of shadow. So that's the shadow that runs along the forehead. And if you're getting confused about what's shadow and what isn't, if you take your eyes out of focus and you really squint, it simplifies the light effect. Then you have a much clearer idea. Okay, so the nose. This. It's actually a bit of an awkward angle because there's so much shadow.
Why did you start from the eyes, eyeline, the brow line?
I mean, there's no rule, I think, to painting or to starting, but it depends really on your angle. So you want to kind of adapt it depending on. So because I haven't got very much shadow, only very much light on this, I don't really see much of the brow because it's lost in the shadow side. So instead, you do see kind of that triangle of shadow on the nose.
Okay. Okay.
And also kind of the beard area. So now I'm plucking that bit of beard. It's very useful painting people with beards because they essentially just have a big shadow shape on their face, which is very useful. And then picture.
You must remember what I figured out in the beginning.
And you're getting something down that you can correct. Nobody paints like a machine. Nobody kind of starts at the top and finishes a perfect painting. This is all shadow.
So you're not putting like any eyes, nothing in yet?
No.
Or you are kind of.
You're trying to isolate the light shape and the shadow shape.
Oh.
And as you're doing that, as soon as you start to kind of put things in, you start to see other things that you can edit and correct. So the eye on this side is a bit dark.
It already looks like it. You can get at least
really good. Okay. And this, actually, even though that's beard, that's still the light shape and the shadow shape.
Yeah, these
So already, I can see a lot that's not right in this, but you have to kind of ignore that and just allow yourself kind of the chance to see that more clearly once you've mapped everything else out. So a lot of this technique is kind of just making decisions that are logical that will aid your eye, because your eye is actually a very kind of fussy and temperamental thing, and can be very easily thrown off. So by forcing yourself to be kind of organised and simple, it helps your eye to kind of see things more clearly and not panic. Because I think your eye likes to panic. So we go. And even shoulders are really important. It's actually really important because actually anything around the setup will affect the way that you see the portrait, and that's why it's so particular how the easel's placed and where you stand, and even having the black cloth around him. It's really particular because all of this will actually affect the way that you see this, and so even kind of the way that you key the background is really important. Okay.
I just want to.
So once you've got enough drawing down, you're not really going to see much more information until you start to block in the main values. So for this, we're going to go for a shadow colour, a light colour, probably a hair colour and a background colour. And so it's worth also spending a bit of time doing this, just because otherwise, if you kind of map everything in completely the wrong colour, then it actually makes it harder to see. So let's go into our background. So the background is...
Sorry, before you used the black ivory and yellow.
Just
yellow.
black, for this one?
Yes.
That was just a kind of neutral brown, so made out of the black vermilion and a bit of the yellow ochre.
Okay.
So I'm going to start by mixing the background colour. And if you look at the other darks on the setup, so the darkest dark is his hair, and that's warmer than the background. So even though you might look at the background and go, it's black, it's actually blue in relation to the hair. So the way that we make blue on this is with our black and a bit of white, because your black is your blue black. It's also quite a little bit kind of purple. You know, add a bit of the...
Seems like a cold grey.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm also putting a bit of terps in with the oil to make it slightly looser, because you're going to cover a larger area with that. Okay. Now the hair. I also find it useful sometimes to mix the values that are next to each other on the setup on your palette, just so that you can then use those to relate kind of as you're mixing. So that's my hair colour. That's actually a pretty good shadow colour. A bit more ochre. Use that.
So your hair is black. Oh, that's your background. Or that's your shadow.
Hair,
The grey is
shadow.
background. The grey is the background, and then the black is the hair.
You're also selecting brushes that kind of relate to the size of the mark that you want to make, and that just comes with practice. After a while you start to think, okay, well, that's a small mark, I can't make that with a giant brush. And a background, there isn't that much kind of detail, so you can block in with a bigger brush.
So your background color was ochre and...
Was black, white, and a tiny bit of red. So basically all the...
Oh, I meant your shadow color. Ochre?
Black, ochre, and red. So all of pretty much everything in the setup is a combination of all four colours, apart from the lightest light, which doesn't have any black in it, and the darkest dark, which doesn't have any white in it. But otherwise you're pretty much using all of the colours. So even in the flesh tone, there's a little bit of black just to knock back the chroma, so the intensity of the colour. Otherwise it's too bright. Let's go. So even with the colours, you're also going, okay, this may not be completely correct, but I'm going within, kind of in the ballpark of, so that I can then get it down and then assess it more easily once it's kind of up against the setup. Because even with colour, until you get it down, you can't assess whether it needs to be warmer or colder or lighter or darker. Okay, so I have those four brushes. And so start to block in the values. That's good. Okay, so as you're doing that as well, you can use it to correct, so I can see that this is a bit wide. Trim that side of the face. Okay, so if you know that all of that area behind him is background, it really helps just to block it in, because otherwise you want to get rid of as much information between your subject and your setup, your subject and your painting, so that your eye, your very temperamental eye, can travel across more freely. So you want to cover all of the white that is just absolutely prohibiting you from seeing. With backgrounds, I think it's nice to have a kind of looser mark, not to, and if you do this, you end up with lots of kind of straight lines and it starts to look a bit flat. So you want to kind of move the paint around, scrub it in.
I like how you make the paint last a long time. I would have went back 10 times, you know, 50 more.
Yeah, you can leave it. You can.
Well, it really gives her like this.
Okay. So now already just by blocking that in, it's much easier for me to see the shapes on the face. So now let's get this sort of hair blocked in. And you want to go right up to the edge of the other paint, not leaving kind of marks to it. Because again, the marks will just kind of confuse your eye a bit. Okay, so his ears. There. So this bit came out a bit too far, but if you already have your background brush, it's very easy to just change it. Shadow. Just what I think want to keep things fairly soft. Your edges fairly soft, especially if you're whilst you're finding them. That makes it a lot easier to change, but also a lot of the edges. I mean, the shadow and hairline are actually from back here, not very sharp. They kind of melt into each other. So you want to, again, just making things as visual as possible.
So that's your light?
That's my flash tip, yeah. Which is not as... So if you, artificial light tends to make things much more orange.
Yeah.
So you're not looking at any kind of detail in the shadows at this point anyway. And that's something you can always add later on, but there's no point kind of going in and trying to draw all the information when you're still unsure if the nose is even in the right place. So, like this. Okay, so this shadow is way too big. I did.
So you put that over the dark and that work just
Yeah.
goes over.
Yeah, so that's what, if you use thick enough paint, you can cover anything, but you can also push it around so you can use the shadow brush to
Because the shadow one is kind of thin, it's not very thick yet.
eyebrow somewhere there. This is where, like I probably keep saying to people, that it's, painting's very like sculpting. You want to start with this like massive kind of clay to oil paint. And once you get that down, then you want to kind of move it around to correct it. But you've got to start initially with the kind of big shape, big light shape and the big shadow shape. Okay. So I might get another brush for the beard and the light, it's slightly brighter. So you can also kind of make, if you have a colour that's similar on your palette, you sometimes kind of make a string or like a side pool of paint. Around that. So I'm kind of switching between brushes like every time, because the whole time you're seeing things that you can correct. And so correcting, you're kind of adding on or taking off something. So if I want to bring the face in, then I use the background brush to bring that in. If I want to change the light shape in the face, then I push the shadow into the light shape. Okay. So let's get this. On the neck. And that ear, which, even though I know it's there, I can't really see it, I've lost into that shadow. So now there's something down that at least I can now assess more clearly, because I've got all my values kind of mapped out, so now I can see this can come in. That light shape comes over a bit. This whole technique is correct.
So what did you use that? Was that just white?
This is my flesh brush,
Oh,
because the flesh colour needs to come over. So the same with the eye, even though I know the eyes have eyelashes and pupils and things from back here, you don't see any of that. All of that's lost. You just instead get this impression of kind of the shadow in the eye socket. And later on you can add your highlights. It's okay.
No, the blue color is